To understand the true history of our planet, you must first destroy the map of the world as you know it. Close your eyes. Erase the Atlantic Ocean. Push the Americas eastward until they crash into the spine of Africa. Drag Australia northwest until it locks into Antarctica and India. Close the gaps. Heal the rifts. What you are left with is not a planet of 7 continents. It is a planet of 1. A single, colossal island floating in a global ocean that covers 3/4 of the Earth. Pangea. The name itself sounds ancient, almost mythological. In Greek, it means all Earth. But to modern science, it is just a geological phase, a diagram in a textbook showing where dinosaurs roamed. But this is a deception. Pangea was not just a different map. It was a different planet entirely. If you were to stand on the surface of Pangea 300 million years ago, you would not recognize the sky. You would not recognize the sound of the wind, and you would certainly not recognize the silence. There is a theory, whispered in the quiet corners of geology and paleontology, that Pangea was not merely a random congregation of landmasses. It was a pressure cooker. It was a singularity in time where life, geology, and atmosphere conspired to create conditions so extreme, so energetic, and so isolated that it may have birthed something far more complex than simple reptiles. We are told that humanity is the first civilization this planet has ever known. We are told that intelligence is a recent accident of the last 300,000 years. But the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Pangea existed for over 100 million years. That is 500 times longer than the entirety of human industrial history. Is it truly possible that in all that vast, deep time, amidst the abundant energy of a supercontinent, nothing else looked up at the stars and wondered? Or is it possible that Pangea was not a cradle but a grave? A crime scene where a previous world was systematically dismantled, burned, and buried beneath miles of basalt and sediment, leaving us to find only the bones of the beasts that survived the purge? To find the answer, we must travel back. We must strip away the modern cities, the forests, and the ice caps. We must descend into the deep time of the Permian period. But be warned, the world we are entering is not a paradise. It is a land of extremes, a land of violent heat, impossible storms, and a terrifying, endless interior where the rain never falls. This is the story of the world before the breakup, and the story of the silence that followed. Imagine you are standing on the coast of what we now call North America, but it is unrecognizable. It is the western shore of Pangea. The year is 270 million BC. The first thing that hits you is the light. The sun is slightly younger, slightly fainter, but the heat is oppressive. There are no polar ice caps to reflect the solar radiation. The Earth is a dark, warm rock absorbing the sun's energy greedily. The ocean before you, the Panthalastic Ocean, stretches for 12,000 miles. It is a body of water so vast that it creates its own weather systems, independent of the land. The waves crashing against the jagged, black rocks at your feet are heavier, faster. The tides here are not like the gentle tides of the modern world. Without other continents to break the momentum of the water, the tidal surges travel around the entire globe, building kinetic energy until they slam into the solitary coastline with the force of a collapsing building. The sound is deafening, a rhythmic, planetary hammer striking the anvil of the continent. But turn your back to the ocean. Look inland. Ahead of you lies a landmass so large that it defies the curvature of the Earth. From this beach to the eastern coast of Pangea is a distance of nearly 10,000 miles. If you were to start walking today, it would take you years to cross it. And for most of that journey, you would be walking through a wasteland that defies modern biology. This is the first great anomaly of the Pangea mystery, the Central Desert. Because the continent was so massive, Rain clouds formed over the ocean could not penetrate the interior. They would dump their water on the coastal mountain ranges, the ancient Appalachians, which were then as tall as the Himalayas, and leave nothing for the center. The heart of Pangea was a hyperarid basin larger than the Sahara, the Gobi, and the Australian outback combined. Imagine standing in the center of this dead zone. The silence here is absolute. There are no birds, for birds have not evolved yet. There are no insects buzzing, for there is nothing here to eat. The temperature oscillates wildly. During the day, the rock bakes at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, it plunges below freezing. It is a place of geological torture. And yet, it is here in this impossible red wasteland that we find the first cracks in the official narrative. Deep in the sedimentary layers of the Permian Basin in Texas and the Karoo Basin in South Africa, areas that were once part of this internal desert, geologists have found peculiar strata. They find red beds, layers of rusted, oxidized soil miles thick. Official science tells us this is simply the result of long-term weathering in a desert environment. But look closer at the chemical signatures. In certain localized pockets of these ancient deserts, we find anomalies in the isotope ratios of carbon and uranium. We find concentrations of rare earth elements that, in our modern era, are only found in two places: the sites of massive volcanic eruptions or the sites of industrial processing. We must ask a question that makes standard archaeology uncomfortable. If an intelligent species evolved in the deep interior of Pangea, isolated from the coastal swamps where the dinosaur ancestors were crawling, how would they survive? They would need water. They would need to engineer their environment. Could the strange, repeating geometric patterns found in some deep Permian sandstone formations be more than just dune bedding? When we look at satellite imagery of the Sahara today, we see the remnants of the great man-made river projects of the 20th century. In 10,000 years, those pipes will be dust. In 100 million years, they will be nothing but a strange chemical signature in the rock. Is it possible that the great aridity of Pangea was not just a natural barrier, but a challenge? A crucible that forced a species to innovate or die? We find trace fossils of burrowing creatures in these deserts. The Diictodon, a small, gopher-like reptile, dug helical burrows into the hard earth to escape the heat. But some of these burrow complexes are massive. They are organized. They connect in networks that suggest a colony structure far more advanced than a simple reptile brain should allow. We dismiss them as instinct, but we always dismiss order as instinct until we find the tool that built it. And in a world 250 million years old, the tools have long since turned to dust. Only the geometry of the tunnels remains. Let us move away from the dead center and travel toward the transition zone, the places where the desert met the green. The weather patterns of Pangea were governed by a phenomenon known as the mega monsoon. Because the landmass was so large, it heated up rapidly in the summer and cooled rapidly in the winter. This created a pressure differential that sucked air in from the ocean with terrifying violence. Imagine a storm season that lasts for months. Not a series of storms, but a continuous planetary conveyor belt of rain and wind. In the summer, the winds would roar in from the Panthalassic Ocean, carrying moisture that hit the coastal walls and detonated. Floods of biblical proportions would wash down the canyons, turning dry riverbeds into raging inland seas overnight. This was a world of violent distinctness. You were either drowning or you were dying of thirst. And it is in these floodplains that we find the giants. The rulers of Pangea were not dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were small, scurrying things, waiting in the shadows for their turn. The masters of this world were the synapsids, the proto-mammals. Look at the Dimetrodon. We see it in toy stores, a lizard with a sail on its back. But it was not a lizard. It was closer to us than it was to a crocodile. Now imagine the Gorgonopsid, a predator the size of a grizzly bear, with saber teeth and skin that was likely not scaled, but glandular, leathery, warm to the touch. These creatures walked with a swagger. Their legs were tucked under their bodies, not splayed out like lizards. They had high metabolic rates. They were active. They were calculating. The fossil record shows us something disturbing about the late Permian predators. Their brain-to-body mass ratio was increasing rapidly. Evolution was accelerating. The cognitive engine was revving up. In the Karoo Basin of South Africa, which was then the temperate south of Pangea, we find fossils of communities. Not just herds, but mixed species aggregations. We find evidence of parental care. We find evidence of complex social hierarchies. If Pangea had continued for another 10 million years, what would these synapsids have become? They had the dexterity. They had the warm-blooded metabolism. They had the dominance, but they were stopped. And this brings us to the core of the mystery, the timing. Just as biology on Pangea was reaching a crescendo, just as the complexity of life was spiking to levels that rival our modern ecosystem, the planet pulled the trigger. It is a pattern we see over and over again in the geological record, but nowhere is it more obvious than at the end of Pangea. The Earth seems to have a failsafe, a mechanism that activates when life becomes too abundant or perhaps too advanced. We call it the Permian Triassic extinction event, the Great Dying. But to call it an event is to minimize it. It was a slaughter. It wiped out 96% of all marine species, 70% of all terrestrial vertebrate species. It is the only known mass extinction of insects. Even the cockroaches died. The official story is volcanism. The Siberian Traps, a massive volcanic province in the north of Pangea, erupted, spewing lava for 1 million years. It burned the coal seams, released carbon dioxide, acidified the oceans, and collapsed the food chain. It is a tidy explanation, fits the models, but there are anomalies in the ash. The speed of the collapse was terrifyingly fast. New studies suggest the final killing blow didn't happen over 1 million years. It happened over a few thousand, perhaps even a few hundred. In geological time, that is an instant. That is a gunshot. And then there is the coal gap. After the Great Dying, for a period of 5 million years, there is no coal found anywhere on Earth. Why? Because the forests didn't just die. They vanished. The fungal spike in the fossil record, a layer of pure fungus feeding on dead matter, covers the entire planet. The world was a graveyard covered in mold. But here is the thought that keeps alternative historians awake at night. What if the Siberian Traps were not the cause, but the result? Or even more disturbing, what if the destruction of Pangea was not an accident of geology, but a necessity of planetary mechanics? Consider the concept of crustal displacement. Pangea was a massive imbalance. All the continental crust was bunched on one side of the spinning ball. The wobble of the Earth must have been pronounced. The stress on the mantle was immense. Physics dictates that systems seek equilibrium. Pangea was an unstable system. Perhaps the breakup of the supercontinent was not just tectonic drift. Perhaps it was a violent correction, a snapping of the planetary spine to redistribute the weight. And if there was a civilization there, a culture of high-intelligence synapsids, or something else that walked in their shadow, they would have had no warning. Or did they? Let us return to the visualization. Go back to the coast. The wind has changed. The sky has turned a bruised purple. The air smells of sulfur and ash. The silence of the central desert is broken by a low-frequency rumble that vibrates in your chest, in your teeth. It is coming from the north. The ground beneath your feet, which has been solid for 50 million years, begins to liquefy. This is the moment the world ended. But before we analyze the destruction, we must look deeper into what was lost. We have spoken of the biology. Now we must speak of the geography of the lost world. Modern geology reconstructs Pangea based on the edges of the continents we have today. We fit South America into Africa like a puzzle piece. But what about the pieces that are missing? When you break a clay pot, you don't get perfect shards. You get dust. You get fragments that shatter and vanish. There are large sections of the Earth's crust that are simply gone, subducted, pushed deep into the mantle and melted down. The lost ribs of Pangea. Geologists admit that entire microcontinents existed between the major landmasses, bridges of land that have since been erased. What if the most important part of Pangea was not the massive deserts of the interior or the storm-battered coasts, but these lost bridges? Imagine an archipelago chain stretching across the Tethys Sea, the massive bay that cut into the eastern side of Pangea. A chain of islands protected from the mega monsoons, protected from the desert heat. A temperate paradise in a world of extremes. If intelligent life were to rise, it would rise there, in the Goldilocks zone of the supercontinent. And where are those islands now? They are gone. Driven under the tectonic plates of Europe and Asia, they are currently dissolving in the magma of the upper mantle. We are looking for evidence of a crime on a hard drive that has been drilled through. But nature has a way of leaving echoes. Let us look at the 200 million year cycle. Recent analysis of geological events shows a heartbeat. Every 26 to 30 million years, there is a pulse of extinction. But every 200 to 400 million years, there is a total system reset. Pangea forms. Pangea breaks. Pangea forms. Pangea breaks. It is a cycle of inhalation and exhalation. We are currently in the dispersed phase. The continents are scattered, but they are already moving back together. In 250 million years, a new Pangea, Pangea Ultima, will form. This means that Pangea was not a unique event. It was just one of the supercontinents. Before Pangea, there was Rodinia. Before Rodinia, there was Nuna. History is a circle. And if history is a circle, then what we are experiencing now, the rise of intelligence, the building of cities, the altering of the atmosphere, may have happened before. Imagine the silence of the Rodinia supercontinent 1 billion years ago. It is even more alien than Pangea. The land is barren rock. There are no trees. But who is to say the silence wasn't watching? We rely on fossils, but fossils are rare. Fossilization is a miracle. It requires an animal to die in exactly the right mud, at exactly the right time, and remain undisturbed for eons. 99.9% of all life that has ever existed has left no trace. If a civilization arose on the grassy plains of the Permian, built cities of wood and organic composites, and was then subjected to the Siberian Traps lava flows, then acid rain for 10,000 years, then glacial grinding, then subduction, what would be left? Nothing, except perhaps anomalies in the atmosphere. Ice core samples from Antarctica go back 800,000 years. That is barely a blink. But sediment cores go back further. And in the deep Permian layers, right before the Great Dying, we see a spike in carbon that is too fast to be purely volcanic. We see a spike in temperature that mirrors our own modern warming models. Was the Great Dying a natural disaster? Or was it a climate collapse triggered by a runaway industrial civilization of the synapsid era? Sounds like science fiction, but look at the Gorgonopsid again. Look at the complexity of the Therapsids. They were on the verge of something. The Earth reset the board, and it took 50 million years for life to recover. When the smoke cleared, the synapsids were gone. The proto-mammals were reduced to tiny, rat-like creatures hiding in burrows. The world now belonged to a new group, the archosaurs, the ruling lizards, the dinosaurs, The Triassic period had begun, but Pangea was still there, broken, wounded, but still a supercontinent. It is in the Triassic, the aftermath of the apocalypse, that the world became truly strange. The interior desert was still there, but now it was filled with survivors. This is where the story shifts from the mystery of the lost past to the horror of the new reality. Imagine walking through the Triassic rift valleys. The ground is shaking constantly. The continent is tearing itself apart. The Atlantic Ocean is being born as a thin, jagged crack in the earth, filling with seawater and lava. The creatures here are nightmares, evolutionary experiments thrown together in the chaos. We find the Lystrosaurus, the ultimate survivor, a pig-sized herbivore that, for a brief window, made up 95% of all vertebrate life on land. Imagine a world with only one type of animal, herds of millions of them, stripping the recovering vegetation bare. Why did they survive when the magnificent Gorgonopsids died? Because they were dull. They were hardy. They could eat anything. They could burrow. It is a lesson for us. The Earth does not select for intelligence. It does not select for beauty. It selects for resilience. When the reset comes, the philosophers die and the cockroaches survive. As the Triassic progresses, the crack in the world widens. Pangea begins to drift, and as the continents separate, they take their secrets with them. South America breaks away, carrying its own unique cargo of life. Australia drifts into isolation. This separation is what allowed us to be here. Evolution needs isolation to experiment. If Pangea had stayed together, humans would likely never have evolved. The dominance of the single super-ecosystem would have prevented the niche experimentation that gave rise to primates. So, in a dark way, we owe our existence to the destruction of that world. But let us pause and look at the forbidden archaeology of the Pangean breakup. There are sites that defy explanation. In the Ural Mountains of Russia, deep in strata that corresponds to the Pangean era, miners have found nanospirals, microscopic tungsten coils. In the coal seams of Pennsylvania, formed in the swamps of the Carboniferous, just before Pangea fully solidified, there have been reports for centuries of out-of-place artifacts. Iron cups, gold chains. Most are hoaxes, misidentifications, pyrite nodules, but not all. There is a statistical impossibility that every single anomaly is a mistake. If we accept the possibility of a deep-time civilization, one that existed on the shores of the Panthalassic Ocean, we must ask, where is their plastic? Where is their concrete? Maybe they didn't use it. Maybe the Synapsid kings did not build with dead stone. Maybe they used the one resource Pangea had in abundance: life. Biological engineering. If you build your cities out of living trees, trained to grow into spires, if you build your ships out of hardened cartilage and bone, if your technology is genetic rather than mechanical, then when the asteroid hits or the volcano erupts, your civilization doesn't leave ruins. It rots. It becomes compost. It becomes the oil we burn today. Think about that. When you start your car, you are burning the compressed, liquefied remains of the Permian world. The energy that drives our civilization is the ghost of theirs. We are harvesting the dead to power the living. Let's go deeper into the breakup. The Jurassic period, 200 million years ago. Pangea is now fracturing into Laurasia, the north, and Gondwana, the south. The climate changes. The mega monsoons fade as the interior deserts are flooded by the new seaways. The world becomes humid, tropical. This is the golden age of the dinosaurs, the giants, the sauropods. But look at the size of them. Argentinosaurus, Brachiosaurus, animals the size of buildings. Physics struggles to explain them. Their blood pressure would need to be impossible. Their bone density seemingly insufficient. Unless the atmosphere was different, we know oxygen levels fluctuated. But some theories suggest the gravity itself or the density of the air was distinct. Was the Earth of Pangea smaller? The expanding Earth hypothesis is widely discredited by modern plate tectonics. We know subduction explains the moving crust, but the anomaly of the megafauna remains. Why has the Earth never produced land animals that size again? Mammoths were big, Paraceratherium was big, but they were dwarfs compared to the titans of the Jurassic. It is as if the planet lost its vitality, as if the breakup of Pangea leaked some vital energy, some atmospheric pressure that allowed life to grow without bounds. We live in a diminished world, a smaller, colder, tamer version of the true Earth. Now, let us travel to the most mysterious fragment of Pangea, Antarctica. Today, it is a white void, place of death. But during the time of Pangea and the subsequent breakup, Antarctica was green. It was a temperate rainforest. We have found the fossils, ferns, Glossopteris trees, even amphibians. Antarctica sat further north then, before drifting to its frozen prison at the pole. If there was a lost civilization of the ancient world, Antarctica is the most likely hiding place. Why? Because it is the only continent we cannot excavate. It is covered by ice sheets 2 miles thick. We know that Piri Reis, a Turkish admiral in 1513, drew a map showing the coast of Antarctica without ice. He claimed his sources were ancient. Mainstream historians say he was drawing a hypothetical southern land, but his map shows rivers, valleys, mountains. Modern ground-penetrating radar has confirmed that subglacial topography matches the map to a disturbing degree. How could a map from 1513 know the shape of the land beneath the ice, when the ice has been there for millions of years? Unless the ice hasn't been there that long, or unless someone mapped it before the freeze. During the breakup of Gondwana, the southern half of Pangea, Antarctica drifted south. But the freeze wasn't instant. There was a window, a twilight period where the continent was isolated, temperate, and uninhabited by the new predatory dinosaurs of the north. A refuge. Could a remnant of the Permian intelligence, the survivors of the Great Dying, have fled south? Could they have held on in the twilight forests of Antarctica while the rest of the world was overrun by reptiles? We see echoes of this in mythology. The land of the Hyperboreans, the distant, frozen north or south, the place where the gods retired. Perhaps the ice didn't just bury a forest. It buried a bunker, and every year the ice melts a little more. We are seeing new islands appear off the coast of Antarctica as the glaciers retreat. We are seeing lakes forming under the ice sheet. Lake Vostok, sealed off for 15 million years. What is in that water? Evolution in isolation produces monsters, or miracles. If we drill into Lake Vostok and find complex life, it will shatter our understanding of biology. But let's return to the main timeline, the death of Pangea. The breakup was not peaceful. It was a 100-million-year earthquake. As the Atlantic opened, it poured massive amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. The greenhouse effect spiked again. The mid-Atlantic ridge is a wound that never heals. It is constantly bleeding fresh magma. This creates the conveyor belt of the ocean floor. And this is why we can't find the civilizations of the Pangean era. The ocean floor is young. The oldest oceanic crust on Earth is only about 200 million years old. Wait, read that again. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. The continents are 4 billion years old. But the ocean floor is only 200 million years old. Why? Because of subduction. The ocean floor is constantly being pushed under the continents and melted. It is a planetary shredder. If the Pangean Empire lived on the coasts, on the lowlands, or on the islands of the Panthalassic Ocean, their homelands no longer exist. They didn't just crumble. They were fed into the furnace of the mantle. The evidence has been atomized. This is the geological erasure that makes alternative history so difficult and so compelling. We are trying to read a book where 90% of the pages have been torn out and burned. We only have the margins, the high mountains, the centers of the cratons, and even those are eroded. The Appalachian Mountains, which ran through the heart of Pangea, were once as high as the Himalayas. Now they are rolling green hills. 10 miles of vertical rock has been ground down to sand and washed into the sea. What was carved on that rock? What statues stood on those peaks? Sand. All of it sand. The sand on the beaches of the east coast of America is the ruins of the Pangean Mountains. You are walking on the dust of the ancient world. But there is one thing that geology cannot erase. Memory. Not human memory. Genetic memory. Why do humans have a fear of snakes? We are primates. We evolved in trees. Snakes were our predators. But why do we have a fear of dragons? Every culture on Earth, from the Chinese to the Aztecs to the Norse, has a myth of a giant flying reptilian monster. Humans and dinosaurs never coexisted. They are separated by 65 million years. So where does the image come from? The genetic memory theory suggests that our mammalian ancestors, the tiny, shrew-like creatures that scurried under the feet of the dinosaurs, imprinted the terror of the archosaurs so deeply into their DNA that it survived millions of years of evolution. We dream of dragons because our ancestors were eaten by them. The memory of Pangea is locked in our amygdala. The fear of the open sky, where the pterosaurs hunted. The fear of the deep water, where the mosasaurs swam. We are carrying the trauma of a world we never saw. Let's shift perspective again. Zoom out, way out. Look at the Earth from the moon. During the Pangea era, the planet would have looked unbalanced. One side, a massive brown and green bruise. The other side, a pristine, endless blue sapphire. The rotation of the Earth would have created a thermal wobble. Some physicists suggest that this imbalance is what triggered the true polar wander, a theory that the crust of the Earth can slide over the core, shifting the geographic poles in a matter of days. If Pangea caused a pole shift, the devastation would be absolute. Oceans would wash over continents. Winds would reach supersonic speeds. It fits the description of the deluge myths found in every religion. Was the breakup of Pangea the source of the flood? Not the biblical flood of Noah, which is likely a memory of the Ice Age melting, but a primordial flood, a flood that wiped out the first world. The time frame is wrong for humans, but the time frame is perfect for the gods. If we accept the idea of root races, the theosophical concept that humanity is just the latest in a series of intelligent species, then Pangea was the home of the third root race, the Lemurians, or something we have no name for, beings that didn't rely on metal and fire, but on sound and vibration. We find strange acoustic anomalies in ancient sites, stones that ring like bells, chambers that resonate at 110 Hz, a frequency that alters human brain activity. Could this be a remnant science? A physics of resonance that was mastered in the silence of Pangea and then lost? Imagine a civilization that moved stone with sound, that vitrified walls with focused frequency. When the continents broke, the harmonic grid was shattered. The music of the spheres was silenced by the roar of the tectonic plates, and we have been living in the noise ever since. We are approaching the end of our journey through the deep time of the supercontinent. The continents are drifting apart. The Atlantic is widening. The dinosaurs are rising to their peak, only to be destroyed by the Chicxulub asteroid, another hammer blow from the universe. The mammals rise. The ice ages come and go. Humans descend from the trees. We build our cities on the edges of the broken plates. San Francisco, Tokyo, Istanbul. We live on the fault lines of Pangea's divorce. We are squatters in the ruins of a mansion, but the pieces are moving back. Geology is slow, but it is relentless. Australia is racing north. Africa is smashing into Europe, raising the Alps even higher. The Atlantic will eventually widen until it stops, and subduction zones will consume it. Pangea Ultima is coming. In 250 million years, the Atlantic will be gone. The Americas will crash into Africa. The world will be one again. The interior deserts will return. The mega monsoons will scream across the single ocean. The silence will fall over the center of the world. And humanity, we will be part of the strata, a thin layer of plastic radioactive isotopes, and chicken bones compressed into a dark line in the rock. Future geologists, perhaps giant cockroaches or cephalopods or something that comes from the stars, will look at that layer. They will see the sudden spike in carbon. They will see the sudden disappearance of biodiversity. And they will wonder, what caused the great Anthropocene dying? Was it a volcano? No, they will say. The isotope signatures are wrong. It looks artificial. And they will write papers about the lost civilization of the Holocene. They will mythologize us. They will wonder if we were giants, if we had magic, if we knew the secrets of the stars. They will not know that we were just frightened primates, arguing over borders on a planet that was trying to shake us off. But we are not there yet. We are still here. We still have the memory, and we still have the mystery. As you stand on the shoreline of the modern world, looking out at the Atlantic, you are not looking at an eternal ocean. You are looking at a gap, a wound. And if you listen closely, under the sound of the waves, under the noise of the ships and the planes, you can hear it, the deep, resonant hum of the supercontinent, waiting to return. The Earth is not done with us, and it is certainly not done with Pangea. The cycle continues. We must look closer at the wound. When a body is cut, the nerves are severed. The signals that used to flow effortlessly from one side to the other are suddenly interrupted. The Earth is no different. When Pangea tore itself apart, it didn't just separate land. It separated the veins of the planet. Consider the gold mines of West Africa. They are some of the richest on Earth. Now look across the ocean to Brazil. The gold mines in the Amazon region possess the exact same chemical signature, the same depth, the same isotopic age. They are part of the same geological vein, snapped in half like a bone. But here is the unsettling question. Did the ancients know this? We are taught that the Atlantic Ocean was an impassable barrier until Columbus. We are taught that the cultures of the Americas and the cultures of Africa developed in complete isolation for tens of thousands of years. And yet, when we look at the oldest legends of these separated lands, we find identical obsessions. The obsession with the jaguar and the leopard, the obsession with the pyramid, the obsession with the constellation of Orion. How is it that the step pyramids of Tenerife in the Canary Islands, islands that are essentially the crumbs left behind by the breakup, look exactly like the pyramids of the Maya and exactly like the ziggurats of Mesopotamia? Mainstream archaeology calls this parallel evolution. They say that humans, faced with the same physics, will inevitably build the same shapes. A pile of stones is the easiest way to build high. But is it just physics? Or is it memory? What if these cultures were not discovering these forms for the first time? What if they were trying to remember them? Imagine a civilization that existed on the seam. A culture that lived in the lush Rift Valley that would one day become the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. When the water rushed in, when the ground split, the survivors would have fled in two directions. Some went east to Africa. Some went west to the Americas. They carried the same seeds of knowledge, the same architectural blueprints, the same fears. Over thousands of years, they forgot each other. The ocean became too wide. The silence became too deep. But they kept building the monuments. They kept telling the stories of the Great Flood and the sunken land. They were not talking about Atlantis as a magical city. They were talking about the Rift Valley of Pangea. The lost continent isn't missing. It's just underwater. And we are looking at its edges every time we go to the beach. Let us dig deeper. Literally. If the surface of Pangea was a place of extreme radiation, extreme storms, and predatory horror, where would a fragile intelligence hide? It would go down. We look for ruins on the surface. But the surface of the Earth is a self-cleaning mechanism. Wind, rain, and vegetation destroy everything within a few thousand years. But the underground is eternal. In Turkey, we find the underground city of Derinkuyu, 18 levels deep, capable of housing 20,000 people, with ventilation shafts, wells, and heavy stone doors that can only be closed from the inside. Archaeologists say it was built by early Christians to hide from Roman persecution, or by Phrygians, but the engineering suggests something far older. The tool marks are difficult to date. Why would humans build so deep? Why would they choose to live like ants? Unless the surface was uninhabitable. If we overlay the location of these massive underground networks with the climate models of the ancient supercontinents, a pattern emerges. They are often located in the transition zones, the areas that would have been battered by the mega monsoons or scorched by the cosmic radiation during magnetic reversals. Maybe Derinkuyu is not a bunker for a war. Maybe it is a survival capsule for a planetary reset. And it is not alone. In South America, there are the Chincana tunnels of the Andes. Legends speak of a subterranean network connecting Cusco to the Amazon. In Malta, the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, an underground temple with acoustic properties that alter the human heartbeat. Were these the cities of the Pangean survivors? If you were a synapsid or a hominid living in the shadow of the Great Extinction, you wouldn't build skyscrapers. You would build hives, and perhaps some of them never came back up. Cryptozoology is often dismissed as fantasy, but consider the mole people myths, the hollow earth theories. While the earth is certainly not hollow, physics forbids it. The crust is far more porous than we admit. There are massive aquifers, vast cavern systems, and lava tubes large enough to fit cities inside. We have explored less of the Earth's crust than we have of the moon. Is it possible that a branch of life adapted to the dark? That while the dinosaurs ruled the sunlit surface of the Jurassic, a different intelligence ruled the dark, quiet roots of the mountains? It would explain the absence of industrial ruins. A subterranean civilization uses geothermal energy. They don't need to burn coal. They don't leave smog. They just exist, quietly, beneath our feet. But let us return to the surface and to the greatest anomaly of all, water. Pangea was surrounded by the Panthalassic Ocean, one massive body of water. But where did that water come from? The standard theory is comets, ice bombardment billions of years ago. But in 2014, scientists analyzing a diamond ejected from a volcano in Brazil found something impossible. The diamond contained ringwoodite, a mineral that only forms under immense pressure in the transition zone of the mantle for 100 miles down. And inside that ringwoodite there was water, hydroxyl ions. Based on this sample, scientists calculated that there is a reservoir of water deep inside the Earth's mantle that holds 3 times the volume of all the oceans on the surface combined. There is an ocean inside the rock. This changes everything about the Pangea theory. It means the sea level is not constant. It is not just about ice caps melting. It is about the Earth sweating. During periods of high tectonic activity, like the breakup of Pangea, the Earth might release this deep water, or reabsorb it. This gives scientific credibility to the flood myths, that appear in every single culture on Earth. If the mantle released even a fraction of its water during the tectonic trauma of the breakup, the sea level wouldn't just rise a few feet. It would rise by miles. Civilizations living on the continental shelves would be erased in an afternoon. The Great Flood wasn't rain. It was the Earth opening its pores. And when the water receded, or was subducted back into the mantle, the survivors would come down from the mountains and find a world scrubbed clean. This leads us to the amnesia of the human species. We act as if we own this place. We draw lines on maps. We fight wars over patches of dirt. But we are living on a raft that is slowly tearing itself apart. The psychological impact of the breakup of Pangea is etched into our subconscious. We are a species of separators. We categorize. We divide. We build walls. Perhaps because we know deep down that the ground itself cannot be trusted. Look at the locations of our most sacred sites. Delphi, Machu Picchu, the pyramids of Giza, Mount Fuji. They are almost all located on or near major fault lines or volcanic hotspots. We are drawn to the energy of the rupture. We build our temples where the earth is weakest. Why? Is it because we are trying to appease the beast? Or is it because those are the places where the deep earth energy, the piezoelectric currents generated by the grinding rock, is strongest? In the Pangean era, the energy grid would have been different. With the landmass unified, the telluric currents, natural electrical currents in the crust, would have flowed in a massive, uninterrupted circuit. Some researchers suggest that the ley lines are not mystical pathways, but maps of these ancient currents. When the continent broke, the circuit was broken. The energy became chaotic. Maybe the ancient monuments, the obelisks, the standing stones of Karnak, the moai of Easter Island, are acupuncture needles, attempts by a lost science to stabilize the grid, to pin down the drifting plates. It sounds impossible, but look at the Great Pyramid. It is aligned to true north with an accuracy that defies modern engineering. It contains granite beams weighing 70 tons, moved from quarries hundreds of miles away, and it sits at the exact geographical center of the Earth's landmass. As it is currently distributed, whoever built it knew the shape of the planet. They knew the math of the plates, and they built it to last through the next reset. We must also consider the atmosphere of Pangea one last time. The oxygen levels during the Carboniferous and early Permian were much higher, 35% compared to our 21%. This allowed for the giant insects, dragonflies with the wingspans of eagles, centipedes 6 feet long. But oxygen is also a drug. Hyperoxygenation improves cognitive function. It allows the brain to work faster, harder. If a species evolved in that high oxygen environment, their mental capacity could have been vastly superior to ours. We are, in a sense, struggling to think in a low oxygen atmosphere. We are the altitude sickness version of life, perhaps the golden age of mythology, when men lived for hundreds of years and communed with the gods, is a memory of the high oxygen atmosphere of the supercontinent. When the oxygen levels crashed during the Great Dying, we became stupid. We became smaller. We forgot. The story of the fall of man, leaving the Garden of Eden, is it the story of leaving the high oxygen forests of Pangea for the arid, low oxygen wastelands of the Triassic? We are breathing thin air, trying to remember a time when we could fly. And what of the moon? The tides of Pangea were violent because the moon was closer. We know it is drifting away from us at a rate of 3.8 centimeters per year. Run the clock back 250 million years. The moon was significantly larger in the sky. This gravitational pull was stronger. The biological clocks of ancient life were tuned to a different rhythm. The menstrual cycles, the breeding seasons, the migration patterns, all locked to a moon that no longer exists in that proximity. Some esoteric traditions speak of a time before the moon. This is geologically unlikely, as the moon formed 4.5 billion years ago. But perhaps they mean a time before the moon changed, before it retreated. Or, if we dare to entertain the captive moon theory, the idea that the moon is not a natural object or was captured later in Earth's history, then Pangea might have been a world without tides, a stagnant, still world. And the arrival of the moon was the catalyst that started the tectonic engine. But that is a bridge too far for this investigation. We must stay with the stone. The stone tells us that Pangea is not dead. It is sleeping. Every earthquake you hear on the news is Pangea tossing in its sleep. Every volcano is a sigh. We are currently living in the Interpangean period, a brief, chaotic intermission between the acts of the supercontinents. Our civilization is built on the assumption of stability. We build coastal cities assuming the sea level will stay the same. We build nuclear power plants on fault lines assuming the ground will stay still. It is a glorious arrogance. We are like ants building a colony on the back of a sleeping elephant. We think we own the elephant. We map the wrinkles in its skin and call them valleys. We drink the sweat from its pores and call it rivers. But the elephant is waking up. The climate change we are seeing now, the rapid heating, the shifting jet streams, might not just be our fault. We are certainly accelerating it, yes, but the geological record shows that Earth wants to be hot. The icehouse Earth we live in is the anomaly. The hothouse Earth of Pangea is the norm. The planet is trying to return to its preferred state, a state of high energy, high temperature, and single, unified landmasses. We are fighting the immune system of the planet, and in that fight there can only be one winner. We must consider the silence of the Pangean world one more time. We imagine it as a place of roaring dinosaurs and crashing waves. But there is a biological factor we have overlooked, a factor that suggests Pangea was not just a collection of animals, but a single, unified organism, the mycelial network. Before the great forests of conifers took over, before the flowering plants appeared in the Cretaceous, the landscape of the early supercontinents was dominated by something else. Prototaxites. These were not trees. They were fungi, giant spires of living tissue standing 26 feet tall and 3 feet wide. They dotted the landscape like alien pillars. We know that mycelium, the root structure of fungi, is Earth's natural internet. Connects plants. It transfers nutrients. It sends chemical signals. In a modern forest, the trees talk to each other through the fungal web. But in the modern world, the oceans break the network. The fungi of America cannot speak to the fungi of Europe. The signal is severed. On Pangea, there was no break. The mycelial mat would have stretched from the South Pole to the North Pole in one uninterrupted, pulsating web, a neural network the size of a planet. If this network possessed even a rudimentary form of biological intelligence, a hive mind of chemical signaling, then Pangea was not just a rock. It was a brain, a single conscious entity regulating its own atmosphere, its own temperature, its own biosphere. This leads to the Gaia hypothesis on a terrifying scale. Perhaps the gods of ancient mythology were not beings from the sky. Perhaps the god was the ground. Imagine a world where the planet itself is aware, where the feedback loops are instant. If a region becomes too dry, the network shifts water. If a species becomes too destructive, the network releases a pathogen. And then the breakup. When the tectonic plates ripped apart, they didn't just break the rock. They lobotomized the planet. They severed the connections. The global mind was shattered into isolated, confused fragments. Is humanity the result of this madness? We are a species defined by our loneliness. We are desperate to connect. We invented language, writing, the telephone, the internet. We are constantly trying to rebuild the web that was lost. We are trying to build a digital Pangea because we missed the biological one. But there is another layer to the Pangean stability that suggests it was a unique epoch in cosmic history. Magnetism. The Earth is a giant magnet. Its poles usually flip every 200,000 to 300,000 years. These flips are chaotic. They let in cosmic radiation. They cause mutations. They scramble the migration patterns of birds and whales. But during the prime of Pangea, something impossible happened. The Kieman reverse superchron. For nearly 50 million years, the exact duration of the great synapsid empires, the magnetic poles stopped flipping. The field locked into place. The shield was up. The radiation was blocked. The environment was stable for a duration that is almost unheard of in geological history. This magnetic quiet zone is the perfect incubator for high intelligence. Evolution is usually driven by chaos, but civilization requires stability. You cannot build a complex society if the rules of physics and climate change every few thousand years. The Kieman superchron was the window of opportunity, the long summer of the Earth, and it ended exactly when the Great Dying began. The magnetic field became unstable. The poles flipped. The shield dropped. The sun's radiation poured in, mutating the DNA of every living thing. The fall of man might be a memory of the fall of the field. We lost the protection of the sphere. We were cast out of the garden of stability into the wilderness of radiation and chaos, and we have been scrambling in the static ever since. Now let us look at the ocean that surrounded Pangea, the Panthalassa. It covered 70% of the planet. It was an abyss of such depth and size that our modern Pacific is just a puddle in comparison. What lived in the deep center of that ocean? We find fossils on the continental shelves, but the center of Panthalassa is gone, subducted. However, oceanography tells us that a gyre of that size would create a dead zone in the center, a place where the currents stop, a Sargasso Sea the size of North America. In this stagnant accumulation zone, debris would gather for millions of years. Biological debris, driftwood, carcasses. It would form a floating island, a raft of organic matter miles thick. Could life have evolved on the ocean, never touching the land? A pelagic civilization, beings that lived on the floating mats of the Panthallassic gyre. They would have no stone, no metal. They would be masters of biology, weaving the seaweed, harvesting the deep-sea giants. When Pangea broke, the currents changed. The gyres collapsed. The floating world would have broken apart and sank. We would find no trace of them, no ruins, just a layer of oil in the sediment. But sailors have always reported seeing ghost islands, lands that appear on charts and then vanish. Are these memories of the floating continents of the Panthallassic? The implications of Pangea extend even to the stars. If you were an astronomer on Pangea, the night sky would look different. Not just the position of the stars, but the clarity. Without the light pollution of modern cities, and with the unique atmospheric density of the Permian, the Milky Way would have cast a shadow. But there is a theory that the solar system itself was in a different position in the galaxy. The sun orbits the galactic center every 250 million years. This is a cosmic year. Pangea existed exactly one cosmic year ago. We are currently returning to the sector of space where Pangea died. Some astrophysicists speculate that certain regions of the galaxy are denser with debris or subject to higher levels of gamma radiation. Did the Earth pass through a bad neighborhood of the galaxy 250 million years ago? Did we hit a cloud of dark matter that triggered the volcanism and the breakup? And if so, we are entering that cloud again right now. The cycle of Pangea is not just terrestrial, it is celestial. The Great Reset might be a scheduled event tied to our position in the spiral arm of the Milky Way. This aligns with the Mayan long count, the Yuga cycles of India, the idea that time is not a line but a spiral. We are back at the start, but let us ground ourselves again in the physical evidence. The fossils. There is a strange gap in the fossil record called Roemer's Gap. It occurs right at the beginning of the Carboniferous, just as the landmasses are coming together. For 15 million years, we find almost no fossils of land animals. Science says this is because the chemistry of the soil wasn't right for fossilization. But the alternative theory is more disturbing. Maybe there were no animals. Maybe the formation of the supercontinent released gases or energies that wiped the slate clean before the explosion of life. A sterilization phase. Before you plant a garden, you pull the weeds. You till the soil. You kill the pests. Was the formation of Pangea a terraforming event? Who or what is the gardener? We attribute the movement of continents to convection currents in the mantle. Hot rock rises, cold rock sinks. It is a lava lamp, but the precision of the cycle is suspicious. The supercontinents form and break with a rhythmic regularity that resembles a heartbeat. If the Earth is a living organism, as the Gaia hypothesis suggests, then Pangea is not an accident. It is a contraction. The Earth inhales, gathering the land. It holds its breath, the supercron stability, and it exhales, the breakup and expansion. We are currently in the exhalation phase, the dispersion, but the inhalation has already begun in the deep crust. We must also look at the out-of-place artifacts in a new light. The London Hammer, an iron hammer found encased in rock dated to the Cretaceous, 100 million years ago. During the breakup, the Antikythera mechanism, a computer from ancient Greece that is far too advanced for its time. We usually treat these as isolated anomalies, time travelers, or misinterpretations. But what if they are heirlooms? What if knowledge in the ancient world didn't improve linearly, but degraded? What if the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids, but inherited them? What if the Incas didn't build the Cyclopean walls of Sacsayhuaman, but found them and built their smaller stones on top? We see this pattern everywhere. Massive, impossible engineering at the bottom. Crude, primitive mud bricks on top. This is the architecture of survivors. The survivors of the Pangean breakup possessed the technology of the Golden Age. They could manipulate stone. They could map the stars. But their children forgot the science. They kept the rituals but lost the manual. And their grandchildren worshipped the machines as gods. We are the grandchildren of the grandchildren. We are looking at the Great Pyramid and thinking tombs, when the Pangeans might have been thinking power plant or stabilizer. The tragedy of the breakup is not just the loss of land. It is the loss of context. We are walking through a library where all the books have been burned, trying to reconstruct the history of the world from the ashes on the floor. But the ashes are telling us something. Coal. Coal is the compressed energy of the Pangean forests. When we burn coal, we are releasing the carbon that was captured 300 million years ago. We are releasing the atmosphere of Pangea back into our own. We are recreating the climate of the supercontinent. We are warming the planet. We are melting the ice. We are raising the sea levels. We are unconsciously trying to terraform the Earth back into the conditions of the Permian. Why? Is it a death wish? Or is it an instinct? Are we trying to bring back the garden? But we forget that the garden was guarded by monsters, and that the heat of Pangea was a heat that killed. As we stand on the precipice of our own environmental crisis, we must realize that we have been here before. The Earth has been hot before. The Earth has been toxic before. The difference is, last time we weren't the ones driving the car. We were just passengers in the trunk. Now we have our hands on the wheel, but we don't know the road. We are driving blind into the deep time of the future, guided only by the shattered maps of the past. We are driving blind into the deep time of the future, guided only by the shattered maps of the past. But even a blind driver can feel the vibrations of the road. And if we pay attention to the subtle tremors in the geological record, we realize that the road is not smooth. It is paved with the wreckage of previous convoys that drove this way before us. To understand the map, we must stop looking at the continents as land. We must look at them as layers. Geology is a book where the pages are made of stone. But in the chapter of Pangea, there are pages that have been ripped out and pages that have been glued together. Let us examine the Carboniferous anomaly. This occurred just before the full consolidation of Pangea. It was the era that created the fuel for our modern civilization, the Coal Age. We are told that for millions of years, trees grew, fell over, and did not rot. They piled up, layer upon layer, hundreds of feet thick, because the bacteria and fungi capable of digesting lignin, wood, had not evolved yet. Think about the absurdity of that statement. Nature abhors waste. In every ecosystem we know, energy is recycled instantly. A fallen tree is consumed by insects, mold, and bacteria within years. Yet we are asked to believe that for 60 million years, the Earth was covered in dead, undecaying wood. That the planet was essentially a hoarding situation. Or is there another explanation? What if the coal seams are not just trees? When we look at coal under a microscope, we see plant matter, yes. But we also see something else. We see order. We see distinct separation of chemical compounds. Some alternative researchers have proposed the industrial waste theory. If a civilization existed on the pre-Pangean continents, and if they utilized a form of biotechnology or massive-scale agriculture, the coal seams might be the result of a catastrophic event that flash carbonized their cities and their farms. Consider the charcoal horizon. In Permian rock layers, we often find fusane, fossilized charcoal. This indicates fire, but not just a forest fire. To create the amount of charcoal found in the geological record, the entire world would have to burn simultaneously. The temperature required to turn a forest into a pure coal seam is immense. It requires pressure and heat that usually only occurs deep underground. But if the trees were on the surface, how were they buried so quickly? We must return to the concept of the mud flood. Not the internet conspiracy theory of the 19th century, but the geological reality of liquefaction. When Pangea began to experience the tremors of the Great Dying, the soil itself lost its cohesion. The ground turned into a liquid slurry. Imagine a forest or a city built of organic compounds, suddenly sinking into quicksand that is 5 miles deep. The surface is swallowed. The pressure is applied instantly. The heat from the friction of the moving crust cooks the material. In an afternoon, a civilization becomes a coal seam, and 300 million years later, we dig it up, burn it, and call it electricity. We are possibly powering our PlayStations with the bodies of the first age. But there is a specific type of artifact found in these coal seams that demands our attention. The black diamonds, carbonados. These are diamonds found in the Central African Republic and Brazil, the two halves of the Pangean Rift. Unlike normal diamonds, which form deep in the mantle and come up through volcanoes, carbonados are found in alluvial deposits. They are porous, they contain hydrogen, and they are extraterrestrial. The chemical signature of these black diamonds closely matches the dust found in supernovae. Why is the surface of Pangea scattered with diamond dust from an exploding star? This brings us to the cosmic bombardment theory of the Pangean consolidation. Did the supercontinent form because the Earth was struck by something massive? A moonlet? A dense cloud of cosmic debris? If a rain of black diamonds fell from the sky, it would have shredded the atmosphere. It would have punched holes in the ozone layer. This might explain the mutations. The synapsids, our ancestors, developed a peculiar feature in the Permian: the parietal eye, the third eye. Many modern lizards, like the tuatara, still have a vestigial eye on top of their heads. It senses light and dark. It regulates circadian rhythms. But in the Permian fossils, the cavity for this third eye is massive. Why would you need an eye pointing up at the sky? Unless the sky was the source of the danger. If the atmosphere was stripped away, or if the magnetic field collapsed, as we discussed with the Kieman reversal, the UV radiation would be lethal. The third eye might have been a radiation detector, a sensor to tell the animal when it was safe to come out of the burrow. We still have this gland deep in our brains, the pineal gland. It is responsible for melatonin, for sleep, and, according to mystics, for spiritual vision. Is our third eye a scar? A biological evolution triggered by the terror of the Pangean sky? We are walking around with a radiation alarm in the center of our brains, but we have forgotten how to read the signal. Let's move from the biology to the hard tech. The problem with searching for Pangean technology is that we are looking for our technology. We look for titanium, plastic, concrete. But a civilization that lasts for 1,000,000 years, unlike our meager 200 years of industry, would not build with unsustainable materials. They would move beyond dead matter. They would master living matter. Silica. We know that silicon-based life is theoretically possible. We also know that the Permian deserts were vast oceans of sand. Silica. If the Pangean intelligence was silicon-based, or if they used silicon as their primary building material in a way we don't understand, their ruins would look exactly like rock. Look at the geodes. We are told that a geode is a bubble in volcanic rock that fills with crystals over millions of years. But look at the geometry. A perfect, hard spherical shell on the outside. A hollow cavity on the inside, lined with crystals that can store information. Quartz is used in watches and computers for its piezoelectric properties. Some geodes are the size of cars. Some, in the pulpy geode of Spain, are the size of rooms. Is it possible that what we call geodes are the fossilized remains of Pangean storage devices? Or power cells? Imagine a technology that grows crystals to store energy. When the civilization falls, the organic casing rots away or petrifies into the hard outer shell. The inner machinery, the crystal, remains. We break them open and put them on our shelves as decorations. We might be using the hard drives of the ancients as paperweights. And then there are the thunder eggs. Solid, spherical stones found in layers of rhyolite ash. The official explanation is spherulitic crystallization. But cut one in half. The patterns inside are geometric. Stars, pentagons, perfectly concentric lines. Nature loves chaos. Nature loves fractals. But nature rarely makes a perfect five-pointed star inside a sealed rock sphere. Unless that rock sphere was engineered. Let us go deeper into the geological unconformity. This is the smoking gun of the Pangean mystery. In the Grand Canyon and in places all over the world, there is a missing layer of time. You have rocks that are 500 million years old, Cambrian, sitting directly on top of rocks that are 1.7 billion years old, Precambrian. 1.2 billion years of history is missing, gone. Geologists call it the Great Unconformity. They say that for 1 billion years, the continent was lifted up and eroded down, leaving no sediment. 1 billion years of erosion, that is enough time to grind a mountain range down to sea level 50 times over. Where did the dirt go? If you erode a continent, the sediment has to go somewhere. It should be in the ocean. But the sediment piles on the ocean floor are not thick enough to account for 1 billion years of missing rock. There is a theory, terrifying in its implications, called crustal delamination. The idea that the Earth sometimes sheds its skin. During the violent assembly of a supercontinent like Rodinia or Pangea, the heat and pressure can cause the upper crust to detach from the mantle and slide, or be subducted en masse. If this happened, the missing billion years wasn't eroded grain by grain. It was swallowed whole. And if a civilization existed during that missing billion years, it is currently dissolving in the magma 2,000 miles beneath our feet. We are living on the fresh skin that grew over the wound. This brings us to the nuclear signature. We mentioned the Oklo reactor in Gabon earlier. Let's look closer. 2 billion years ago, in a uranium deposit in Africa, which was then part of a different supercontinent configuration, a nuclear reaction started. Science says it was natural. Groundwater entered the uranium vein, acted as a moderator, and started a fission reaction that lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. It is the only natural nuclear reactor ever discovered. But the physics are incredibly precise. The ratio of U-235 was exactly right. The water flow was exactly regulated to prevent a meltdown but sustain the boil. If it was natural, it was a miracle of probability. But if we view it through the lens of the forgotten Earth, a different picture emerges. The waste products from the Oklo reactor are contained. They did not leak into the surrounding environment. It looks like a dump, a geologically stable nuclear waste storage facility. We are currently struggling to figure out where to put our nuclear waste. We are digging holes in mountains, Yucca Mountain, and worrying about leakage. Maybe the ancients solved this problem 2 billion years ago. They used the natural geology to burn up the waste. And if they had nuclear power 2 billion years ago, where were they during Pangea? Perhaps they had already left. Or perhaps they had ascended. This moves us into the realm of the shadow biosphere. We assume that life must be carbon-based, water-dependent, and visible. But in the Pangean deserts, the conditions were more like Mars than Earth. Could a life form exist that feeds on radiation or on electricity? We have found bacteria today, Shewanella and Geobacter, that eat electrons. They plug themselves into the rock and draw power directly from the minerals. In the highly charged, static-filled environment of the Pangean drylands, where storms generated lightning bolts that lasted for hours, could an electric life have evolved? Beings of plasma and dust. The jinn of ancient mythology are described as being made of smokeless fire. Could the jinn be a cultural memory of a plasma-based life form that inhabited the deep deserts of the supercontinent? They wouldn't leave fossils. When they die, the electrical charge dissipates, and the dust falls to the ground. They would be invisible to archaeology, but they would be visible to the third eye of the synapsids. Maybe the terror of the Permian was not just the predators with teeth. Maybe it was the entities that lived in the lightning. Let us ground ourselves again in the physical rock. The salt paradox. In the Zechstein Basin of Europe, part of northern Pangea, and the Lewin salt of the Gulf of Mexico, we find salt layers that are miles thick. We are told this is from the evaporation of ancient seas, but the chemistry is too pure. When seawater evaporates, it leaves a dirty mix of gypsum, anhydrite, halite, and potash. But these ancient salt deposits are often 99% pure sodium chloride. To get salt that pure, you need an industrial process. You need to filter it. Why is the underskin of Pangea lined with industrial-grade salt? Salt is a crystal, conducts ions. Was the salt layer a battery or a conductor? If the mycelial network was the software of the planet, was the salt layer the hardware? A global conductive grid used to transmit telluric currents from one side of the supercontinent to the other. When we mine this salt today to put on our French fries, we are eating the wiring of the ancient motherboard. And then the sound. We spoke of the silence. But Pangea was likely the loudest place in the solar system. The supermonsoon winds, hitting the mountain ranges would have created infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that travel through rock and bone. Infrasound can induce fear, hallucinations, and nausea in humans. But what if you evolved in it? The creatures of Pangea might have used infrasound as a weapon or a language. The Parasaurolophus, a later dinosaur, but part of the Pangean legacy, had a crest on its head that was essentially a trombone. It could project low-frequency sound over miles. If the civilization of that era understood acoustics, they could have built sound machines. We find megalithic sites today like Stonehenge or the Malta Hypogeum that resonate at 110 Hz. This frequency switches the human brain from left hemisphere, logic, to right hemisphere, emotion/creativity. Was this a training technology? If the Pangean air was thick and resonant, maybe they didn't need radios. Maybe they just spoke into the earthnet. They sang to the stone, and the stone answered. The concept of songlines in Aboriginal Australia, the oldest continuous culture on Earth, speaks of singing the world into existence. They say that the land must be sung to, or it will die. Australia was a key fragment of Pangea. It drifted alone, carrying the oldest secrets. Are the songlines a user manual for the Pangean acoustic grid? Now, let us look at the Great Dying through the lens of a system crash. If the Earth is a self-regulating organism, and Pangea was its high-energy state, why did it crash? Perhaps it was a buffer overflow. Life became too complex. The energy consumption of the biosphere exceeded the replenishment rate of the planet. The Carboniferous forests sucked too much carbon dioxide out of the air. The Earth began to freeze, the Karoo Ice Age. The planet was suffocating from too much oxygen and too little greenhouse gas. So the Earth triggered the Siberian traps. It lit the coal on fire. The volcanoes were not an accident. They were a carbon injection system. The planet realized it was freezing to death, so it burned its own reserves to warm back up. The Great Dying was a controlled burn that went out of control. It saved the planet from turning into a snowball Earth, but the price was the death of 90% of life. This implies a terrifying intelligence to the geological mechanism. It implies that the Earth cares about life, the concept, but it does not care about lives, the individuals. It will burn 1 billion synapsids to save the biosphere. And if we are currently pushing the carbon levels too high, the Earth will not burn us. It will likely freeze us or drown us. The Meltwater Pulse 1b that happened 11,000 years ago raised sea levels by 50 feet in a few centuries. That is the mechanism of the cooling flush. We are worried about global warming, but the geological record shows that warming is often the trigger for a sudden snap freeze. The Atlantic current shuts down. The heat transport stops. The glaciers return in a decade. We might be preparing for the fire while the ice is sharpening its knives. Let us return to the shattered maps. There is one map that remains constant, the sky. But even the sky has changed. The Saturn myth. Some alternative historians trace a global mythology that says the sun used to be different. It was fixed in the north. It was dimmer. It had a crescent. The electric universe theory suggests that our solar system was not always in this configuration. That Earth may have been a satellite of a brown dwarf star, Saturn, before being captured by the current sun. If this happened, it would have been during the Pangean era. A world under a purple, dim star. A world of eternal twilight. No seasons. No tides. This would explain the purple Earth hypothesis. The idea that ancient plants used retinal, purple, instead of chlorophyll, green. If Pangea was a Saturnian world, then the breakup of the continent was actually the moment we were stolen by the sun. The gravitational shock of entering a new star system would have shattered the crust. The increase in light would have blinded the creatures. The UV radiation would have forced the mass extinction. And we, the survivors, are the children of the new sun. But we still dream of the purple twilight. We still associate the color purple with royalty, with the divine. Is it a memory of the old star? And what of the giants? We find the bones of giant animals. We find the footprints of giant ancestors, like the ones in the Paluxy River, though controversial. Gravity is the limiting factor for size. If Pangea had lower gravity, everything makes sense. The dinosaurs, the giant dragonflies, the cyclopean architecture. How could gravity change? If the Earth spun faster? If the atmosphere was denser, buoyancy? Or if the Earth was physically smaller and expanded? The expanding Earth theory is hated by geologists because it violates the conservation of mass. But what if mass is not conserved? What if the Earth is growing? What if matter is being created in the core? If the Earth is swelling like a balloon, then Pangea wasn't a continent floating in an ocean. It was the entire skin of a smaller planet. Imagine a small ball covered entirely in crust. No oceans, just land. Then the ball starts to expand. The crust cracks. The gaps fill with water from the interior. The continents are not drifting away from each other. They are just the pieces of the original shell moving apart as the balloon inflates. If this is true, then Pangea was not an island. It was the whole world, and the Panthalassic Ocean didn't exist yet. This would explain why the dinosaur fossils are the same on all continents. They didn't have to swim, they just walked, because there was no ocean to cross. It is a radical, heretical thought, but the forgotten Earth requires us to be heretics. It requires us to look at the Pacific Ocean not as a body of water, but as a stretch mark, a scar of growth. And if the Earth is growing, is it going to pop? Or is it birthing something? We must consider the moon again in this context. Is the moon a piece of the Earth that was ejected during this expansion? The Pacific Basin is almost exactly the same volume as the moon. Did we lose a piece of ourselves? The trauma of that separation would be the defining moment of terrestrial life. The Big Whack. If a civilization existed before the moon was torn out, they witnessed the death of the world. They saw the ground rise up and become the sky. This fits the description of Ragnarok, the war in heaven. Maybe the asteroid belt is not a failed planet. Maybe it is the remains of the previous Earth, the one that didn't survive the expansion. We are living on Earth 2.0, or Earth 5.0. We are the reboot, and the glitches are everywhere. Look at the impossible fluid dynamics of the atmosphere, the hexagonal storm on Saturn. We see similar hexagonal cloud formations appearing over the Bermuda Triangle. Is the geometry of the solar system imprinting itself on our weather? Are we living in a simulation? The simulation hypothesis is the modern version of Gnosticism. The idea that the world is an illusion, but let's keep it grounded. Pangea was real. The rock is real. But the story we are told about it is a simulation. A simplified, safe narrative designed to make us feel secure. The continents move 2 inches a year. Everything is slow. You are safe. That is the lie. The truth is, the continents usually move 2 inches a year, but sometimes they move 200 miles in an hour. Catastrophism. The woolly mammoths found frozen in Siberia with buttercups still fresh in their mouths. They didn't die slowly. They were flash frozen. The temperature dropped to minus 150 degrees in minutes. How? Only an atmospheric collapse or a crustal slip could do that. If it happened to the mammoths 12,000 years ago, it could happen to us tomorrow. We are building glass towers on a planet that likes to shake things off. We are writing history books in ink when we should be chiseling them in granite. because the ink will wash away. As we move deeper into this story, we must realize that the forgotten Earth is not just about the past. It is about the future past, the ruins we are building now. What will the Statue of Liberty look like in 100 million years? She is made of copper. She will oxidize. She will crumble. The concrete base will erode. But the gold leaf on the torch? Gold is eternal. It does not react. In 100 million years, a future geologist might find a thin, unexplained layer of gold flakes in the sediment of the North American Craton. He will call it the Aurum anomaly. He will write a paper, Natural Concentration of Gold Due to Bacterial Action. He will not know about the dream of liberty. He will not know about New York. He will just see the dust. This is why we must tell the story of Pangea. To save our own memory, we are trying to signal to the future. We were here. We felt the sun. We feared the dark. We tried. But the signal is weak. We need to amplify it. How? By understanding the resonance. If we can tune our civilization back into the frequency of the planet, the Schumann resonance, maybe we can ride the wave instead of being crushed by it. Maybe the next Pangea doesn't have to be a tomb. Maybe it can be an ark. The ancient myths speak of the 7 sages who survived the flood to restart civilization. They carried the me, the tablets of destiny. We are the sages of the next cycle, but we have lost the tablets. We are trying to rewrite them from memory, and our memory is foggy. We remember dragons. We remember floods. We remember a golden age. These are not fantasies. They are data points. They are the black box recording of the previous crash. We need to stop dismissing mythology and start decoding it. The story of Atlas holding up the sky, a memory of the lithosphere hardening. The story of Prometheus stealing fire, a memory of the first harnessing of volcanic energy, or the recovery of technology after the freeze. The story of the Tower of Babel, a memory of the breakup of Pangea, when the one people were separated and their languages drifted apart. And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. Let us go down, and there confound their language." That is the geopolitical description of plate tectonics. The separation was necessary for growth, but the reunion is necessary for survival. We are approaching the reunion. The internet is the Tower of Babel being rebuilt. We are speaking one language again, and the gods, the geological forces, are watching. Will they strike it down again? Or have we finally learned enough to keep the tower standing? We are driving blind, but the map is in the trunk. We just have to pull over, open the lock, and read the stones. But before we open the black box, we must address the stranger in the room. We have spoken of the earth, the stones, the dinosaurs, and the forgotten kings of the Permian. But we have not spoken of the anomaly that is looking at the screen right now. If the earth is a perfect, self-regulating biological system, evolved over 4.5 billion years to fit its inhabitants perfectly, then why do humans fit so poorly? Look at the animals. A wolf does not need clothes. A bear does not need a heated house. A lizard does not get sunburned after 30 minutes of exposure to the star that it evolved under. But humans are naked, weak, and soft. We are the only species on Earth that suffers from chronic back pain. Why? Because our spines are not designed for the gravity of this planet in a vertical position. We are trying to stand up in a world that wants to pull us down. We are the only species that requires cooked food. We are the only species that destroys its own environment. And we are the only species with a circadian rhythm that does not match the rotation of the planet. Experiments in deep caves, where humans are cut off from sunlight, show that our natural internal clock drifts toward a cycle of roughly 25 hours. But the Earth spins in 24 hours. Every single day, for our entire history, we have been fighting a 1-hour jet lag. We are biologically out of sync with the rock we live on. Why? Did we evolve on a planet that spun slower? Or did the Earth used to spin slower? During the Pangean era, the tidal drag of the moon was different. The rotation was different. Is it possible that we are not modern humans? Is it possible that we are relic humans? That we are a species evolved for the conditions of the supercontinent, a warmer, slower, protected world, and we are currently struggling to survive in the fast, cold, radioactive environment of the breakup? We are not conquering the Earth. We are surviving the crash. And then there is the blood. In the natural world, a mother's blood does not attack her own baby. It is against the primary law of survival. But in humans, we have the rhesus Rh negative factor. If an Rh negative mother carries an Rh positive baby, her body identifies the fetus as a foreign pathogen. She produces antibodies to destroy it. This is the rhesus disease. Why would evolution create a mechanism for a species to kill its own offspring? Unless it wasn't evolution, unless it was a hybridization. Some theorists suggest that the Rh negative gene is a legacy of a distinct branch of humanity, the Pangean bloodline, a lineage that was isolated for millions of years in the deep interior or the southern polar forests. When the populations merged after the breakup, the bloodlines clashed. The biological incompatibility is the memory of that separation. We are a species at war with our own blood. This leads us to the most uncomfortable possibility of all. We look for the ruins of the lost civilization. We look for the stones, but maybe we are the ruins. Maybe the high technology of the ancients wasn't a machine. It was a genetic modification. Maybe the sudden explosion of human brain size, which tripled in a geological blink of an eye, was not a happy accident of eating bone marrow. Maybe it was an upgrade. If the Earth resets every 12,000 or 26,000 years, and a civilization knows the reset is coming, they know they cannot save their cities. The glaciers will crush the buildings. The floods will wash away the libraries. So where do you store the data? You store it in the DNA. You modify the survivors. You encode the geometry, the fear of the cataclysm, and the capacity for language into the genome. We are the flash drives of the ancients. We are walking around with the Library of Alexandria encoded in our junk DNA. 97% of our DNA is non-coding. Science used to call it junk. Now they call it dark DNA. They admit they don't know what it does. It is silence. But as we discussed, silence is not empty. Silence is waiting. Maybe the junk DNA is the Pangean operating system, waiting for the right frequency to turn it on. And this brings us to the mechanism of the reset. How does the world end? We fear the asteroid. We fear the nuclear war. But the Earth has a much more efficient way of cleaning house. The crustal displacement. Imagine the Earth as an orange. The core and mantle are the fruit. The crust, the land we live on, is the peel. The peel is not glued to the fruit. It is floating on a layer of lubricating magma. Normally, the friction keeps it in place, but mass is accumulating. The ice caps in Antarctica are growing. Despite global warming, the mass of the ice sheet is immense. The weight is unbalanced. Think of a spinning top. If you glue a penny to one side, it will wobble. Eventually, it will tip over. The Zanabekoff effect, or the tennis racket theorem, shows that a spinning object with an unbalanced distribution of mass will periodically perform a 180-degree flip to stabilize itself. It happens instantly. If the Earth's crust were to slip, Antarctica would move to the equator. The equator would move to the pole. The inertia of the oceans would remain. The water would not stop moving just because the land shifted. The result would be a supersonic tidal wave. A wall of water 2 miles high, moving at 1,000 miles per hour, washing over the continents. It would scrub the earth clean down to the bedrock. This is the flood of Noah. This is the flood of Gilgamesh. This is the flood of Atlantis. It is not a myth. It is physics. And where is the safest place to be during a crustal slip? The pivot points. If you put your finger on the side of a spinning basketball, it moves fast. If you put your finger on the top, it barely moves. If the ancients knew the math of the slip, they would build their arcs at the pivot points. We look at the Giza Plateau. We look at the navels of the world. Were these the geostationary zones of the last reset? The places where the ground didn't move as violently? But there is one continent that has remained suspicious through all of this. Antarctica. We return to the ice one last time. Why are all the world's major powers obsessed with Antarctica? Why did the Nazis send an expedition there in 1938? New Swabia? Why did Admiral Byrd take an entire naval fleet there in 1947, Operation High Jump, and return terrified, speaking of vehicles that can fly pole to pole in minutes? Why do global leaders, from religious patriarchs to presidents, visit Antarctica secretly? It is a continent of ice. There is nothing there but penguins. Unless the Piri Reis map is right, unless the lost civilization didn't die, they just froze. Cryogenics is a modern dream, but nature has been doing it for eons. We have found nematodes, worms, in the Siberian permafrost that woke up after 46,000 years. They were frozen. They thawed. They lived. If a worm can do it, can a civilization do it? If the Pangean elite saw the end coming, the great dying, or the breakup, did they build a vault? Not a vault of seeds, like we built in Svalbard. A vault of themselves, buried deep under the ice of Queen Maud Land, protected from the radiation, protected from the tsunamis, protected from the passage of time. Sleeping, waiting for the supercontinent to return, waiting for the magnetic field to stabilize. The hollow earth myths often center on the poles, openings into the inner world. Maybe they aren't openings into the center of the planet. Maybe they are vents, ventilation shafts for the city below the ice. And as the climate warms, as the ice melts, the vents are opening. We are seeing pyramids in Antarctica on satellite imagery, massive four-sided structures that cast perfect shadows. Geologists say nunataks, mountain peaks shaped by wind, but nature rarely builds four perfect sides aligned to the cardinal directions. If the ice melts, what will we find? Will we find empty ruins? Or will we find the sleepers? And if they wake up, who is the owner of the earth? Us, the survivors who struggled in the mud for 10,000 years? Or them, the masters who slept through the winter? It is the plot of a horror movie, but it is also the plot of history, the return of the king, the second coming. The archetype of the return is etched into our psyche. Why? Because it happened before. The cycles of the earth are not circles. They are spirals. We come back to the same place, but on a different level. We are currently approaching the 0 point of the cycle. The magnetic field is weakening. The poles are shifting. The weather is becoming chaotic. The signs are all there. We are the last generation of the interglacial. The summer is ending. So what does this mean for us? Should we panic? Should we stop paying our taxes and dig bunkers? No, panic is a waste of energy. The earth does not care about your panic. The purpose of understanding the forgotten earth is not fear. It is perspective. It is the so what moment. When you realize that civilization is fragile, you stop taking it for granted. When you realize that the map is temporary, you stop fighting over borders. When you realize that we are likely the 5th or 6th attempt at intelligence on this planet, you lose your arrogance. We are not the masters of the earth. We are the caretakers. And we are the students. We have been failing the class. We have treated the earth as a dead resource to be mined. We stripped the copper, the gold, the oil. We cut the forests. We silenced the animals. We broke the mycelial network. And now the landlord is coming back to inspect the property. But there is hope. The earth is resilient. It heals. Look at Chernobyl. In 40 years, without humans, it has become a lush nature reserve. The animals have returned. The trees are growing over the concrete. The earth knows how to fix itself, and it knows how to fix us. The awakening that people feel, the sudden interest in meditation, in psychedelics, in ancient history, in reconnecting with nature is not a fad. It is a biological imperative. It is the species trying to remember how to interface with the planet before the connection is cut. We are trying to download the instructions before the system reboots. The Pangean consciousness is leaking back into our world. We see it in the concept of the new sphere, the sphere of human thought enveloping the earth. The internet is the physical manifestation of this. We are building the brain of the earth again. We are stitching the continents back together with data. And maybe, just maybe, if we can stabilize the connection, if we can harmonize with the planet, we can survive the transition. We can ride the wave instead of being drowned by it. Imagine a future where we don't fight the earth. A future where our cities are built with the geology, not against it. Geothermal power, crystalline storage, acoustics that heal. A future where we are not Americans or Russians or Chinese, but Terrans, Earthlings, citizens of Pangea Ultima. It is a long way off, 250 million years until the land is physically one. But the consciousness can be one today. The forgotten earth is only forgotten because we chose to forget. We chose the comfort of amnesia, because remembering is painful. Remembering the cataclysm, the fire, the ice, the loss. It is a trauma, but to heal trauma, you must face it. You must go back to the scene of the crime. That is why we dig. That is why we explore. That is why we look at the stars. We are looking for the pieces of ourselves that we left behind in the drift. And as we stand here at the end of the story, we must look forward. The sun is setting on the Holocene. The shadows are getting long. The wind is picking up. Can you feel it? The deep, low vibration in the soles of your feet. It isn't a truck passing by. It isn't the subway. It is the engine. The tectonic plates are moving. The Atlantic is widening. The Pacific is shrinking. The Great Cycle is turning. We are just dust on the cogs of a machine so vast and so old that we cannot comprehend its purpose. But we are thinking dust, and that makes all the difference. Perhaps the purpose of the earth is not to just grow trees and lizards. Perhaps the purpose of the earth is to generate a story of a planet that tries over and over again to wake up, to create a mirror that can look at the stars and say, I am. We are that mirror. We are the eyes of the earth. And for a brief moment, before the ice comes, or the fire comes, or the crust slips, we have the privilege of seeing the truth. We are not alone. We are never alone. We are standing on the shoulders of giants who drowned. We are walking on the ashes of gods who burned, and we carry their fire in our blood. Pangea is not a place. It is a time. And it is a promise. The promise that no matter how far we drift apart, we will always come back together. The earth is one, and so are we.